what job should marketing get done in a company?
I think marketing's job above all else is just building trust. There's the wave of like SaaS and VC funded companies, I think, has changed the way we define marketing. It's become more of a demand gen function. It's become something like almost like a back office to sales these days. And I think it's sad that it's gone that way. I understand the commercial reality behind it, but at its core, I think marketing is just about building trust, both externally and internally as well, because so much of what we do is, just about getting people to feel safe and understand that, okay, we understand what your problem is, and this is what we're solving for, and you're in good hands. And really, that's at its core, that's what marketing is all about. And you can build as many theories as you want on top of that, as many people have, and as many playbooks or whatever, but ultimately that's what we're here to do. And the trust extends internally as well, I think, because when you're speaking of, and I have worked in large companies in the past in non-marketing functions, and when you're on the business side, you don't think twice about marketing. You don't even know that marketing exists, and so many times you're just sort of completely disconnected from what the company actually does. You don't understand the product. You kind of work on it, you understand what the customers are doing, but you don't really understand why the product needs to exist, what it does, what the customers feel. I think it's also marketing's job to spread the word internally, saying that this is what we do, this is how we help. Now, if you're going to ask me practically how would I do that in, say, a large bank or something, I have no idea. But I think it's something that every marketer should aim for.
That's Vivek Shankar, a content strategist and content writer who I met through an initial disagreement on LinkedIn. We were discussing how to use AI in your writing processes, and he suggested using it to write the first draft. I definitely disagreed with that at the time, but then further into this episode, we share a little bit of that disagreement, and honestly, I'm more aligned with Vivek than I thought I was, which is super fun. But before we get back to the conversation, run the intro. Welcome to On Marketing, a show where we uncover what marketing is. I won't tell you what to think. I'll help you improve how you think about marketing and life. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. This is recorded on February 28th, 2025. All opinions shared in this podcast are the individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employers or associate organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional marketing or life guidance. Listeners act on the information provided at their own risk. Thank you for being here and enjoy the conversation. I love the trust that it's not just external, which would be the instant thought is like, okay, we're building trust with prospects, customers, but also internal. And I heard it, Dave Gerhardt, probably like 5-6 years ago, talked about that kind of internal marketing. And it never really hit me of like, yeah, that's actually important to be intentional about it, to not just say, hey, we wrote 5 blogs this month, but like, what are those blogs doing and how does that influence pipeline? How does that influence revenue? So I really like that. And I think your point is valid, is there's no one way. It's not a weekly email that you send out to the team. There's different ways within different teams of how you would do that. But I love that idea of building trust internally alongside it externally as well. That makes a lot of sense.
The internal thing gets often neglected, isn't it? And I know we were just talking about LinkedIn and all of this, but I've seen so many posts on LinkedIn, even on Twitter back when it was active. Like, yeah, sales won't read my marketing stuff and they're not using my content and this and that. I'm mostly in the content world, so that's what I'm speaking to. But yeah, it's like, sales doesn't use it, the founder doesn't like it. And I think that's where the internal side of things comes in. So yeah, it is an overlooked function of marketing, I think.
In the work you do, Vivek, you talked about content. How do you actualize that definition? Or maybe you're not using content to build trust, but I can only imagine that content is a tool, an avenue to achieve that job. Talk about how you see content or the work you do reinforcing that job of building trust externally and maybe even in a unique way internally. I'm not sure how content could do that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I am mostly in the financial world, and I think content plays a huge role in trust because you're literally dealing with money. Now, I'm in B2B, so that means, the my clients and the content that I produce is mostly dealing with stuff around how companies can manage money, how companies can move money, how companies can save money, etc. Those are the major pillars, I would say. And trust comes it's one of the major challenges, I would say, for any fintech or financial app, which is, why should you use us, right? Why not use somebody else? And then once somebody signs on, the next question is, okay, where's my money? Is my money safe? And this and that. So content, I think, especially in B2B, plays a huge role. And there are different formats, of course. So I'm not making a distinction between written and video and etc. But I think content overall definitely plays a huge role. Um, one of the one of the ways which is very specific to finance is just being as transparent as possible about regulation and ensuring that your content sticks to regulatory guidelines. It's a bit of a challenge because as a marketer, you want to say all these things about, how amazing my product is and these are the benefits. This is what you can do with it. But you can't say those things according to regulatory guidelines because those guidelines are there in place to protect the consumer or really any user of the product. So it's quite a challenge sometimes is navigating that fine line. And I'm based in the EU, so there's I have quite a few EU clients based in the UK as well, and the regulations here are even more stringent than in the States, right? So it's quite interesting. It's a nice challenge in terms of, okay, how can I finesse my message within these regulatory guidelines and still build that trust? But I think within fintech and finance, just sticking to regulatory guidelines just does the job for you in so many ways because it's almost as if the regulators have sometimes done the job for you, because the minute you say that, okay, this is, giving a US example, this is FINRA approved or this is, I don't know, approved by the CPFP or something like that, it does tend to lend a lot of weight to your content. The other way is talking about practical experiences and highlighting experiences from people who are actually in the field. So fintech is one of those places or niches, I would say, where as a content producer slash creator, whatever, you need to speak the language, but you are not the practitioner. It's very obvious when a practitioner speaks versus somebody who is just wanting to sound like one. So I think highlighting those actual experiences is a great way of building trust and just delivering, high quality content as well along the way.
I have very limited experience in banking, doing marketing for banking, but I've just noticed to some of that point that there are these challenges that then, so my mind went to then a lot of times in response to not being able to say all these things, it comes out very generic then, which then I don't know if generic content builds trust, that I can read it and I don't know who, if I take the logo off, there's no kind of sense. So then your second point is like using some of those people, the experiences of those people that have the expertise or have, that then starts to make it less generic. Do you see that battle of like, does generic content build trust or does it have to have something more to it that builds trust, where if it's just generic, anybody could, again, go to AI and just say like, what is this or what's a CD? Because I don't know what CDs are. But like, how do you think about generic? But you obviously can't go too far because there are those regulations or saying certain things you can't do. How do you think about that?
Well, I'd like to take a step back first and say that not all content is not all, like, different pieces of content have different goals. So I know we began this by saying that marketing's job is to build trust, but when we practically execute a content program, I think a common sort of, I don't want to call this a mistake, but it's more of an impression. A common impression that people have is, okay, each and every piece of content I produce has to build trust. Each and every piece of content I produce has to be the best thing ever produced. And the fact is that's not possible, because just practical reality does ensures that that'll never be the case. Because if you wanted to produce the highest piece of content quality, in every piece of content that you produce, you will probably end up with like 6 pieces of content. That's it. Because honestly, taking the case of a CD, if I'm a bank, really, how much content can I possibly produce, right? That builds trust and that also ticks the box of being the best piece of content out there. There's about 6 or 7 pieces. Now, If I am running my own bank and if I'm running my own marketing, I'll be very happy with that. I'll run with it. But that's not how businesses work, right? If I'm a marketer in a bank, I cannot go tell my boss that, listen, I'm producing these 5 pieces, just pay me for the rest of my life, right? That's not going to work. And from a marketing standpoint, marketing lives within a broader function, which is basically, we call it GTM in B2B SaaS. So, and traditional industries call it something else. They call it sales plus marketing, what have you. But ultimately, there are these broader campaigns, right, with which marketing lives. And marketing doesn't always get a say in terms of which way these campaigns should go, because a lot of them, especially in finance and fintech, they are driven by sales. And marketing just has to kind of fit itself and strike a balance between what we've spoken about so far and hitting that commercial reality. I'd say that's true for any job function. It's just how the world works. You're not going to live in an ideal world. You just have to strike that balance. So coming back to your question, which is, the pieces of content, right? And going generic versus, being more differentiated. I think it depends on the piece of content. I have produced pieces of content that are super generic, that even before AI was around, they read like they were written by a machine, simply because, that's the amount of effort that content demanded. And that was its role. Its role was just to sit, I'm not a fan of the funnel here, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to say that piece of content's role was to sit at the top of the funnel and just bring in as many clicks as possible, right? And once people were on the site, we hope that, okay, they're going to take a look at this other piece of content that we have that dives a bit deeper, that's a bit more nuanced, that is a little more differentiated, and okay, they're going to go over there, right? And this is how pieces of content work. I feel like content that is revenue adjacent, right, or that is um, revenue adjacent is a very sales driven way of describing content. From a marketing perspective, I'd say content that really cuts to the core of what we do, that connects that pain point to the product. That sort of content should always be super differentiated. And I don't think it's about AI versus non-AI. You and I have had a lot of debates about this offline, but I don't think it's about AI versus non-AI. I think it's more about what kind of a voice you're bringing to it. AI is just a tool. You can use AI to sort of build that voice. But, you know, going back to your question, I think the differentiation and the sort of it's perfectly okay to have bland content. You just need to know why it's there, right? As long as you're clear about what each piece of content's role is within your broader funnel, within your broader org, what have you, your campaign, as long as you're clear about that, I don't think undifferentiated or bland content by itself, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a problem when that bland content is present in the wrong part of your campaign or funnel.
I love that. The thought that, or the that each content demands different amounts of time, resources, all of that, wherever it'll fit. That makes a lot of sense. You can't treat every piece of content like the Mona Lisa, spending tons and tons of hours, weeks, months, years into it. You need to have that. Makes sense. Which we're going to get into AI. I think that's a great topic to kind of get into. As you referenced, we have had many LinkedIn back and forth, but my point on that was more so that AI can give these very generic answers now as a consumer using it, not as a marketer creating content with it, which we'll get into in a second. But I just find it's starting to just, especially in like marketing, there's like what's inbound marketing or all these very like just stupid, in my opinion, posts that or blogs that you don't need to do because AI, if I want to understand it at a very 101 level. But your point is that you can use AI to still create differentiated content. Weirdly enough, I think I'm behind you on that. But let's talk about, I want you to share for the listeners this kind of debate that has happened where people say, if you use AI, you're just playing the quantity game and you can't have quality, and this, you can't have both, your cake and eat it. I think I'm inching more and more to your viewpoint, but I want to have you lay out the argument or kind of the different sides. You had a recent Substack that I will link into this podcast, but just share kind of the argument in a high level, your thoughts on it, and then I think we can kind of go back and forth from there.
My position is, as I mentioned in the Substack, it's pretty straightforward. AI is a tool. That's it. And I I don't see this as much on social media these days, but I do recall as recently as 6, maybe 7 months back, a lot of familiar voices in the content world sort of having completely ridiculous takes about AI, saying that okay, this is gonna cheapen content. This is a fight for creative marketing's creative soul, and all this. There was a very famous content marketer who I'll not name had that YouTube video, which completely, I didn't understand the point of it, but I guess it's part of their campaign, so good enough. But it's these kinds of takes are really just they're a bit hyperbolic, and if you can't say something about a hammer and furniture, don't say it about AI and marketing, right? Like you can use as many tools as you want, but you still see differentiated furniture, right? So why is it that if I use AI, somehow my content is magically not differentiated? If I use a tool to build a chair or something, and if the chair turns out bad, I'm not going to blame the tool. I'm going to say, well, I'm a terrible carpenter, right? But for some reason, when I use AI and the content isn't good, for some reason, it's the AI that's at fault. Part of this is just that we're still learning how to use AI. And I think no matter how many prompts people post, no matter how many websites and newsletters pop up saying that, hey, here's a useful prompt or whatever, I think prompting is a very surface level way of understanding AI. If you play around with AI enough, when I say play around, I mean actually use it for some of your use cases and try to generate content from it. I think when you do that, you'll kind of understand how prompting works. I don't think people really need prompting guides. I think what people really need to understand is the little ticks and the little nuances of how AI works. For example, something that I find very few people talking about is how inconsistent AI can be. You can run the same prompt 5 times, and each time you get something different. Now, why is that, right? Now, if I change the context, if I prime the AI a little differently, I get a different answer completely. And these kinds of things where, and this is just on a manual level, I'm just chatting with, say, Claude or GPT or whatever. When I take these LLMs into an entire workflow, if I use a tool like, say, Hunch or AirOps or Make or one of these AI workspace tools, and I start connecting the LLMs to one another, and I start introducing code blocks in between, you're just opening up this Pandora's box of like all those little ticks and nuances. They just compound massively, right? And for me, that's where the interesting conversation is. It's not in prompting or, oh, here's an interesting prompt. Like I saw something on LinkedIn, I think it was either today or yesterday, which was like, here's a great prompt to help GPT, or to help GPT just like give you market research and audience research. I'm like, well, okay, this is great, but tell me more about how you would feed this into a bigger flow so that it actually helps me, right? So that's where I stand with AI. I think it's a fascinating tool, but we still don't understand how to use it, and we're exploring that. So, and along the way, we're going to have some pretty terrible takes about it, and that's normal because we're still learning, right?
And I think the loudest or the most outrageous takes are the ones that are amplified the most. Like the middle ground rarely gets the likes and the virality that someone saying that, the creative class is over, whatever that kind of video was. Now, I do have a question though, because some of the bits on how, so let's say the tools to build the furniture were harder to use. You needed more acumen to be able to use them. My argument would be then you have less furniture that's poorly put together, or the furniture lasts longer because it took a longer time to create it. And now I see this mainly with sales outreach, maybe not as much with content, but because you can now send 50 sales emails automated through AI, which then creates horrible actual messaging. Now it takes a bit more, in my opinion, to stand out in the inbox because you have 50 AI messages. You can make the counter inverse that it's actually easier because they all suck, but it's just noise in that sense. You don't agree with that in the content world, that because the tool has enabled some people to make content 100 pieces in a day, you don't think that floods the market and then creates dynamics, whether it's the bar, all of these things. You don't see that happening. You think it's kind of overemphasize that it might happen, but it just won't be as big as everybody's predicting? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because I struggle with that piece, that more content has to have some dilution or something to the other content, just like more money. Inflation makes lesser, all of that. It just is natural that the more money you pump into an economy, the less each dollar is worth. You disagree with that, or do you see it on a lesser scale and it's not something to hang our hats on as an argument
It's a
point?
good point. I don't disagree with the observation. I do disagree with the conclusion. So what I mean by that is I don't disagree with the fact that yes, AI has made it way easier for us to create garbage. Like it's way easier, right? And the AI outreach is a very good example. I mean, you leave a little funny prompt on your profile and immediately the AI picks it up and you get this stupid like outreach message in your inbox, right? So yeah, I totally agree with that. That is happening, and the same thing is happening in content as well. Full disclosure, one of my niche sites that I run, when I first when GPT first came, I started producing this kind of garbage content just to see that okay, it was can I just build traffic using this at speed, right? And it failed miserably. And that leads me to the next part, which is where I say that I disagree with the conclusion, because I think sticking with the financial theme here, I think every market has self correcting mechanisms within it. So if I'm going to go out there and many other people like me will go out there, keep producing this garbage content, people will notice at some point and they'll be like, okay, this is garbage. What that does is it increases the value of stuff that is actually valuable, that is actually differentiated, and that has, that actually solves my problem, right? That speaks to me. And how do we create that content? It's by doing stuff that marketers are supposed to do. I need to get to know my customer. I need to know my product. I need to make the link, the basics, right? I just need to do that. And how I produce that content has nothing to do with that initial work. If I do all that work and if I use AI to produce this kind of content, and maybe not at scale, not at the same scale at which garbage content is being produced, maybe not 100 a day, but can I produce one a day? For sure, I can do that with AI. And before AI, I could have produced maybe one or two per month before, those kinds of pieces of content. Now I can do maybe two, three a week. So why shouldn't I use it? So in that sense, I think AI has definitely been a boon. It's just that it goes back to the thing, like, it's the person using the tool is using it wrong. So that's ultimately that's what I come back to. So I do agree with the observation that yes, content is being diluted in many ways. But whenever you have something that's diluted, when you see something that has real, let's say, flavor to it or that actual differentiation to it, it enhances the value. So there's never been a better time to actually use AI the right way to scale your content. And it'll give you greater ROI because there's so much more potential for garbage out there.
Yeah, I love that thought. The self-correction makes a lot of sense. And I think we're very much on board, Vivek, of why go in the carriage, the horse carriage, when you have a car there, because I can get to my destination. And so I think it's that where it's a tool. It's a tool that, but if you get in the car drunk or you don't know how to drive, it can be very dangerous then because you're hitting people where the horse might just bump somebody, where now you just ran over a whole crowd of people. So I totally agree with you. Blame the person, most likely, not the tool, because the tool is getting outcomes for people who know how to use it. So we're in agreement there. And I think a lot of your insights are very nuanced, because I think it's a tough conversation, or it's just hard to kind of grasp. To your point, we're new, we're early in it. Now, a piece, and I want to kind of end this before we get into life, but a piece of the AI debate that I think we maybe even started our first debate was you suggesting using AI to write the first draft. I found that to be kind of intuitive, and I'll be completely honest, there have been clients in the past that I have used through a conversation or different things, put that into it and created a first draft because time or whatever. So I'm going to be the first to admit I've done this path, but I just struggle to see that being the best method. So I'd love for you to explain why you use AI for the first draft, the benefits, and kind of maybe not try to convince me, but I'm going to try to be open and maybe convinced by your thoughts on why AI is great for the first draft and not for like editing or for both and not, because I just use it to edit or to kind of give me ideas, and then I like that first draft pass. But your idea of having AI do it was interesting. So I'd love for you to break down why you do it and the benefits you receive.
Before I begin, you're not alone in sort of questioning me on that. I was playing around on Blue Sky recently just to sort of just to see what it was about, and I responded to something that Jay Akunzo had well, not tweeted, but he had messaged on there, and I said the same thing. I'm like, well, I think you should use AI to write, and he was just like, yeah, good luck with it, man. Like. So I was like, okay, Blue Sky doesn't have the character limit for me to respond in a nuanced way. So I was like, all right, that's what he thinks. Brilliant. But yeah, I think it's a good question, and here's how I think of it. When people say writing, what they're really talking about, and I'm only talking about content writing here. I'm not talking about creative writing, which is a completely different world. Content writing, when I produce a piece of content, when I'm in the act of producing it, the act of content writing is two things wrapped into one. There is the thinking part of it, and then there's the physical typing, right? Because none of us use pens anymore, right? My handwriting will attest to that. But it's the physical act of typing, and then there's the thinking that goes along with it. When I say I use AI to write, I'm talking about that physical act of typing. That is what AI is doing for me. AI is not doing the thinking for me. So, in a practical manner, in a practical process, what does that look like? This was a realization I came to when I was first designing my own little AI process to see, like, okay, what can I scale? What can I automate? And one of the things I did was really just breaking things down as minutely as possible, right? And that's when I realized that, okay, the act of writing is these two things. Where does a lot of the thinking take place? I realized that the bulk of my thinking that I am doing is taking place at the outline creation stage. It's not taking place when I'm writing. When I'm writing, I am literally, filling in the blanks. Not, I would say it's not 100% sort of one to one as an analogy, but it used to take me much longer to create briefs and create outlines than it would to write, because the brief stage and the outline stage is where I was doing all the research. It's where I was figuring out what the structure should look like, what needs to go where, how do I make this point, what sort of example should I be giving, is there any SME input I need at this stage, etc., etc. That's where a lot of the thinking was happening, right? When I was actually writing, I was literally looking at my outline. Okay, I need to do this next. Okay, write this, right? And my outlines, the way I used to structure it, and even when I used to give it to my writers, the way I would structure it is I would literally have like little prompts in there, and I would say, this is what we're talking about. Begin with this, lead into this, H3, H3, H3. This is what the H3s talk about, list as bullets, whatever. So super detailed outlines, right? And when I was doing this, I found that writing itself was super easy. And if you were to ask me why I did it this way, it was honestly to be more efficient. Because the way I used to work when I was a freelance writer was that I would send these outlines to my clients and I'd be like, okay, just approve the outline. If it's good for you, then I'll write. Because I don't want to write something, send it to you, and receive it back with a bunch of edits, because that just wastes both of our time. So what I used to do is send them these really detailed outlines, which were about, I would say 50 to 60% there in terms of the article itself, right? They'd look at it, they'd approve it, and then writing is easy because I just need to follow the prompts in there. So my own writing, the actual physical writing, was quite machine-like. I used to just look at the outline, follow that process, and that was it. Very simple. So when I say that I use AI to write, that is what I mean. I'm automating that physical part of it. The actual thinking that's taking place, I'm not automating any of that. I'm using AI to prompt me further, to brainstorm, to maybe dig deeper, find me the right links, which is the bane of every content marketer's existence, right? Like, don't give me the surface level link, give me the link to the actual page or whatever. That's what I'm using AI for. And I'm also using AI to learn about topics, because if you from a business standpoint, if you want to make more money, you kind of have to expand your niche a bit, right? You don't have to jump from, say, fintech to, I don't know, cybersecurity or something, but every niche is quite broad. So you kind of have to go into these different sort of nuances. And I tend to write quite a lot about institutional finance. And that is a huge, huge world, right? There's no, I mean, so as much as we talk and shout about content marketing or whatever, like institutional finance and that writing is a whole different planet altogether. So it's impossible to learn everything about what these companies are doing because so much of it is opaque. I use AI to help me sort of understand all of that stuff. Things that would have previously taken me, I don't know, a week, I can learn in like 30 minutes. And it explains it to me like I'm 5 years old. It explains it to me as if I'm a college student, whatever. It does all that. So that's what I mean in terms of the writing. The physical act of writing is different from the thinking that you put in. As long as you do the thinking, feel free to go ahead and automate that physical writing bit. That's the way I see it. So I think perhaps I know quite a few content writers who don't put too much thought into their outline. They kind of have a little skeleton there, and then they do the thinking while they're writing. I feel, yes, if that is your process, then it's going to be quite difficult to use AI to replicate that. But I think if you want to scale and you want to get that speed in, I think separating those two makes a lot of sense. So I think that's where my comments are coming from.
I love that, Vivek. I think that's the funness of conversation online versus in person or virtual as we're doing, is you can just get so much further of like, geez, of course I agree with you. Like that, because I think most of the time when I think about it, I'm like, oh, the writing is paired with both the act of doing it and the thinking. But the way in which you just propose that makes so much sense. And even I have in some outlines or some briefs gotten more detailed, and it does make for such easier, more kind of like robotic writing because it's all there. And then it's like, oh, that makes so much sense for AI to be fed this and then to write. So I think we agree far more, I think, than we disagree. And will be interesting in the future if, because AI becomes more ingrained in how we work, does this detailed brief, does this detailed outline become something that so many people want to do? Because then I can do more of the leveraging of AI for not the thinking, but the doing. That makes so much sense. And I appreciate you kind of maybe hanging on with me for these months and time of kind of saying, oh, we disagree, but really I think we're very much aligned. It's just how our processes are is maybe different. And now I'm starting to think maybe my process should be more detailed briefs, more detailed, spend more thinking on the outline. So that was a great challenge or a great thought that you shared there. But I could talk to you, Vivek, about content, about AI, about marketing forever. So we do need to get to the life part of it to kind of, in my opinion, somewhat the part that actually matters, because marketing, all this will go away at some point and all we have left is our life. So how do you think about or answer the question, and this is just your answer, so unique to you, what's the purpose of life? What should we be aiming for? What should we be trying to do with our life?
Oh, well,
Simple.
it's really simple. Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't claim to have the answer here, but my personal view is, life is about sleeping well at night. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. There was, it's derived from that Maya Angelou quote, which I don't remember the exact quote, and I might be butchering it here, and I apologize for that. But she wrote something like, success is about loving what you do, loving how you do it, and being comfortable who you do it with. That's what success is about. And I think, if you tick those three boxes, you're going to sleep very well at night, I think. And ultimately, that's what it's about, like how well, if you are happy with what you're doing and if you're staying true to yourself, I think you can sleep very well at night and you won't have any problems when you wake up. Sure, there will be the occasional, like, okay, I need to deal with this, I need to deal with that, whatever. But, that's just how life is, right? So, yeah, ultimately, success and, what have you is just about sleeping well at night.
Peace of mind when you put your head down on the pillow. Have you always, Vivek, had that as your North Star, or was that something you learned through experiences in life of maybe I thought that this should be a North Star and then I've changed? Or was that always something that you had since you were young, ingrained, that I want to have this life that I can sleep well at night. Was that always your North Star, or did that change?
No, it's a very recent thing. When I was younger, so I grew up in India, and this was India in the '90s, which was very different from whatever India is these days. Just for more background, back then India was almost like a quasi-socialist sort of country. We were just emerging from our own brand of socialism. Like we were a democracy, but still after independence and everything, India was a quasi-socialist country. So we were emerging from that, and I think we didn't have a lot. I mean, when I grew up, there was no Coca-Cola, right? The first time I drank Coca-Cola was when I went to the States for college. Like that was my first time actually drinking it. So yeah, so that was where I came from. So this when I moved to the States and I was introduced to this materialistic sort of and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying, like, okay, you can have these nice things, and if you work hard and you can make all these things. Then I worked in finance for a while, and I was in New York, where that feeling was intensified like 100 times. And so there was a lot of ambition there, and I was exposed to this different world. And meanwhile, my parents back home, my dad especially, he was working for a company that was owned by the Indian government. Very secure job, like didn't get paid much, but very secure life. He was able to provide our family with an excellent sort of security financially, etc. So he always slept very well at night. And he would always say this. He was like, well, yeah, this happened and that happened. And, he dealt with a lot of, I would say, setbacks in terms of corruption and all of this, because, it's just a part of life in India. He dealt with all of that. And I remember him telling me once, he's like, well, yeah, I didn't do that, but I can sleep well at night. And I didn't understand it when he first said it. I must have been in my early 20s at that time. I didn't really understand it. And, I had all these things that I wanted to do. And ultimately, some of them failed, some of them succeeded. And throughout the whole time, I was always agitated. I was always very, I would say, um, not frustrated, but I was very angry on the inside that, okay, I did not get this. Like, this is wrong. This is whatever. And I couldn't sleep at night. So something that he told me then, he was like, well, I can sleep well at night, and that was his way of justifying, like, okay, it's all good. Um, so that kind of always stuck with me. And he wasn't trying to give me advice. We were drinking at the time. So he just said, well, I can sleep at night. So it just stuck with me. And it's changed, I think, just the way my life went. It's a more recent thing.
Thank you, Vivek, for sharing. I think, though, it's a probably common trope that the way in which our parents live their life, because to your point, your dad wasn't giving you advice. He probably modeled that advice his entire life, that his whole life was built around this sleeping well at night. So then eventually, I mean, again, not all prodigal son, we do have some times where we have a model and we just go vastly the other way, but many times the model is kind of where we eventually align. And I think it's a lifelong journey, which you kind of talk about, that we've all have maybe something modeled early, then we go out on our own. We kind of maybe try to find success or joy or happiness in these things. Kind of like the prodigal son story, we just find, hey, this isn't it. I don't feel as fulfilled. I don't feel as grateful. And it's very easy sometimes, too, for me or certain individuals to kind of say those things because it's like you're at the bottom of the ladder anyway. But I think it's like the earlier you can grasp that material, that some of these things won't give me whatever I'm looking for, that when they do come, or if they do come, I'm more prepared to weather that storm than to be sucked up into the power, the corruption, and all that. So then eventually I can't sleep well at night, even though I have a huge house, I have a cabin here, I have all these things, but it's like I struggle to go to bed at night. And I find that to be super good advice that I'm trying to apply in my life at all times, whether job or whatever's going on in my life. It's like, can I go to bed that I kind of put my best effort in? I loved everybody that I wanted to. I didn't hold things back. I didn't say, I did not say I love you, all that. I think that's a really solid way to live your life, is to do things that help you sleep well at night. So I love that.
Yeah, and to your point, like, even I think when we chase things, we often feel like, okay, once I get this, it's going to solve all my problems. But getting that, life is just one problem after another, right? And I think that's a very Buddhist way of thinking about it, because Buddhism is a very pessimistic philosophy, but you need to pair it with the methods of dealing with those challenges. And when you put those two together, you see that it's actually quite optimistic. So yeah, so when I say that, yeah, life is one problem after another, I think I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just saying, like, that's just how it is, and yeah, if you can sleep well at night despite dealing all of that, I'd say you're pretty successful, and yeah, the things you own, as long as they don't own you, you're doing pretty well.
I think that's a wise place to end this podcast, Vivek. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on content, marketing, but even more so on life and the sleeping well at night. I really appreciate your thoughts.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And this is the end of the podcast. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post it on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.